Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. I am thrilled to be here with you all for this upcoming session. And for those of you who were in the tent yesterday, many of you may have heard Jeff Koons talk about real joy. And that is exactly where we are headed in 2 minutes after I introduce these two incredible human beings, Sarah Lewis and Tyler Mitchell. I love Sarah Lewis a lot. She has the most incredible, magnificent brain. And what's even more impressive is her beautiful, graceful heart. I feel so honored to have met her, and I love getting to introduce her today. She is an award-winning scholar, author, and advocate. I'm doing a condensed version because we want to get to them. She is the founder of Vision and Justice, a catalytic civic initiative that generates original research and programs that reveal the foundational role of visual culture in America's representational democracy. At Harvard, Sarah is the John L. Loeb Associate Professor of the Humanities and Associate Professor of African and American Studies. But before joining the faculty at Harvard, she held curatorial positions at MoMA and Tate in the departments of painting and sculpture and the Department of Photography. There are so many awards and accolades, but just wanted to ground you in who she is. It's also extra magical that our lives, my husband and I, weaved into Sarah's because my late mother-in-law, Toby, loved Sarah, and she supported Sarah's curation of the site Santa Fe Biennial in 2010. Now, Tyler Mitchell is as sublime as his work is. For those of you familiar with his work, he is the divine and the sublime coming through. He is an incredible artist, photographer, filmmaker. He was born in Atlanta, Georgia. He received his BFA in film and television from NYU, Tisch School of the Arts. His work introduces new narratives around beauty and desire, often drawing from the past to create fictional moments of an imagined future. Through these images that emphasize empowerment, transcendence, play, and self-determination, Mitchell offers a vibrant and generative view of Black life, often by intentionally blurring the conventions of fashion and photography. In 2018, he made history as the first Black photographer to shoot a cover of American Vogue. My understanding is Beyonce actually asked for you. So he shot Beyonce. And a year later, one of those portraits was acquired by the Smithsonian National Portrait Gallery. His work is held in major public collections worldwide, including MoMA, the National Portrait Gallery in London, and LACMA. He has collaborated with leading magazines and fashion houses such as Vogue, W, ID, Loewe, Louis Vuitton, and Wales Bonner. A special synchronatic moment is both of these two are being honored at the Aperture Gala in October, and we have the leadership of Aperture here with us tomorrow in conversation with my dear friend and photographer, Alex Hedison. So we've got a wonderful lineup. I'm going to bring these two amazing humans to the stage. You both are incredible.
Let you go.
Okay.
Extraordinary. Mel Lewis, thank you so much for that powerful and heartfelt introduction. It's mutual. It's a mutual admiration society. I adore this extraordinary heart and mind and leader that she is. I cannot wait to have this conversation with the sublime Tyler Mitchell, who's also a dear friend. And I want to first just offer a few notes of gratitude before we really dive in. Aspen Institute, for me, has become a place to delve into the power of the imagination and the arts, and the leadership, Dan Potterfield, Graham Vesey, Karen Stein, Ava Hartman, all those who put this event together. I just want to thank you. Not just for this event, but for how you've consistently modeled how we need to salute the power of the arts, not as ancillary to the real work of how we create a more just society, but as integral for it. So thank you for this opportunity and this time. And we do have amongst us so many of our friends and our comrades. We have extraordinary photographers and documentarians here. And we have some mentors and dear friends. There is one surprise guest for me here whose work I think has never been more critical and whose leadership has always been a model for me, and that is the head of the Smithsonian, Lonnie Bunch. Yeah. What a gift you are for all of us now and today. And here we have a model for us all and how we utilize the power of the image to change our perceptions of the world. So Tyler, before we dive into your work, I wanted to see if you have anything you'd like to start with, and then we'll go into the video.
Well, no pressure. No, thank you. It's an honor to be here. Aspen Ideas is something I've looked towards actually a lot. I've watched a lot of talks on YouTube, so it's sort of surreal to be invited. Ava, thanks. And we can go right into it because we have about 50 slides to go through.
Yeah, we have a ton.
And we can share my work and share some of the ideas that underscore both of our work. For me, I'm a huge admirer of Sarah. I'm glad she said yes because as a student, NYU student, as I mentioned, even though I was in the film department, I was becoming increasingly obsessed with photography and its power, its potential, and Sarah's project Vision and Justice was a huge, almost like a Bible that Deborah Willis, my professor and mentor, gave to me and said, here, start here with your research. So her work underscores my work. We're collaborating in exciting ways now, and yeah, it's just nice to share the stage actually with you, so we can go right into the work.
Yeah, and we should prime the audience for one thing. Normally the template is we talk and there's a Q&A, but if you don't mind, we're going to make this a little interactive. So you can get ready for that at maybe the 35-minute mark. So that's just passivity here. All right, so now we'll begin.
We can start. I wanted to start with a short 2-minute clip of installation video, actually, that I sometimes present in my exhibitions called Idyllic Space. Yeah, it sort of sets, in a way, a barcode for the rest of my work, and we can just go into it. To know, it's normally, when installed in museums and galleries, viewed on the ceiling, and viewers are invited to lay down on the floor and look up at the video, and it's filmed and made with this in mind, but still. So that's normally that's a 12-minute piece in which is projected onto a ceiling of a gallery space, but I wanted to give a 2-minute snippet to frame up our talk.
I've seen this work installed. I've never experienced it in nature. And the sounds convey a sense of a nostalgia for a present that doesn't exist but should be able to be lived out. One of the aspects of your work, or the many, that I find so extraordinary is that you're able to build this tension between this world of play and fantasy and the imagination and the lived realities that might prevent it. I wonder if you can speak to how this tension, as it seems to me, is built into your practice from the very start with your early portraiture, and any thoughts about whether that's an accurate way to describe your practice?
Yeah, that's a very accurate way to describe my work and to think about. I think, being born and raised in Atlanta, Georgia, in the South, there's a real hypervigilance that was sort of built into me, at least from a young age, about occupying public space.
Yeah.
There was a sort of, that I wanted my work to start to release or sort of process how young men around me, young black men around me could exist in space together, how they could consider dress also as a tool to convey alternative ideas around masculinity, presence. That's why I think fashion is such a nice vehicle for my work in a lot of ways. And I think, I think this tension between, as you said, the imaginative and the fantastical, and of course joy and presence, with is sort of detonated by the political. And the ways in which, in particularly the United States, we are able to show up in public spaces. Those are all questions that my work is sort of asking and exploring.
Yeah.
So.
And as you're going through these early images, and I think the next image might be a good place to land on here, you're giving us some of the ways in which you've fashioned your own language and idiom to do this. It's not accidental that tension emerges. It's through careful study and composition. And one of those devices, it seems to me, is the use of the backdrop and here, and the symbolism of the American dream. I think in the All-American Family portrait, which has stayed with me ever since I first saw it. Can you speak to how your process conveys that tension?
Yeah, I think I'm somehow lightly staging these moments. Rather than intentionally constructing every element of these pictures, I'm often collaborating with people. Most of the people in these photographs are either friends or from my wider artistic community and network in New York City. This particular family is a real family friend, so to speak. I'll go back. Tyra Mitchell, the young mother pictured here, is actually a photographer, and coincidentally, people would confuse us because we were both photographers, and it's Tyler and Tyra Mitchell. So that's how we came into contact. But there's also a layer of community underpinning all of the pictures. And when I'm creating these, I'm often, again, envisioning, figments, moments of presence that I would like to see in the photographic canon, often underscored by research, whether that's looking at your project or other influential black image makers that have come before me. And this particular image was made actually in an area of Queens where we were looking for a park or more of a pastoral, leisurely area to create, and we came across lots and lots of American flags in people's yards, lots of interesting politically charged messaging, often conservative, in this area of Queens. And then when researching the area while we were there, we realized there were lots of race riots that had happened in the 80s in this particular area in Queens. So it felt very exciting, or not exciting, but actually urgent to make a image of my friend Tyra with her twin babies and their family in the face of some of these symbols, but also the styling plays a huge role, right? Creates this almost otherworldly, situates itself in America, of course, with the flag, but through the styling almost creates almost a sort of science fiction landscape or an otherworldly landscape. So I'm often thinking about how these things are interacting, whether it's layers of community, portraiture, dress, and of course environment. Yeah.
One of the unique features of your work, and I think one of the reasons why it's such a model for many, is that you're able to trespass different worlds that don't often come together. Here you have friends of yours who've become effectively representations of an icon here being an idea of the American dream, but you've also photographed icons, Beyonce being one of them. And I wonder how who's in front of your lens transforms, if at all, your practice, your composition, and your process?
Yeah, well, I think it should be said I was making a lot of these portraits within the same sort of series of years, between 2015 and 2018. And of course, I was thinking and activated by, again, my own research, but also what was going on in the world at that time. So I was thinking about the urgency of making portraits mainly of friends, as I said, in my community. But then when asked to make, essentially a career highlight commission with Beyonce for Vogue, it was one of the early times where I think she was also interested in exploring visually her own lineage, her own Creole lineage, her own Congolese and Haitian background. And so we wanted to activate these symbols that have always been present in Black portraiture, whether it's the studio painted scenic backdrop, when you think of African studio photography, like Malik Sidibe or Seydou Keita, whether you even think of the sort of classical or more European stylings like this column and this crown. All of the symbols we were both, it was such an amazing collaboration because she was as equally aware not only of my work, but of the work we needed to do for this commission to make it resonant for the both of us. So I would say this points to basically what I was doing for years before with friends, but just this time with a very wonderful pop icon. And I would say that, just going back to that, I would say that I try to make these commissions no different than the way I would approach my own work. And I think that's really been a very generative space for me to blur the boundaries of fashion, in quotation marks, and my own artistic practice. So,
one of the joys I had a few years back is having you come to Harvard. We had a conversation with my students, and at the time, how old were you then, maybe?
23.
23, I think. To see in the eyes of my students the sense that they could become artistic icons themselves because they saw in you what you had done. You had just, I think, photographed Beyonce. What was such a thrill. And I've seen lives transform from that conversation alone. So I want you to know the impact that you've had.
Yeah, and there was, I mean, there's a brilliant critic who I'm a huge fan of now, young critic who revealed to me later. Her name is Zoe Hopkins. She's a brilliant, and there's also a conversation we had about how few Black art critics there are at the moment, right? And how that urgently needs to change. But she's one of the few who I find really a brilliant writer. And while I just reached out to her because I liked her writing, and while we were getting lunch, she said, I was actually in that room with you and Sarah Lewis at Harvard, and I loved that talk. So it's something I didn't know if you knew that, but yeah. And so there is this also this inner conversation I'm having with peers, getting the space to do so much and make my work. That's a part of my practice also.
I'm so moved by that because Zoe was actually my thesis advisee, and she had not disclosed that. That's beautiful. My goodness. So you have transformed lives. You're continuing to do so, and one of the ways that you transform the public's imagination of who counts and who belongs is through your work with the Metropolitan Museum's gala called the Met Gala. It's been in existence since what we find out, 1948? 46, we learned today. Long time, but it really has become a central feature of not just the New York cultural scene, but the global fashion industry's center point. It was a first this year for a number of reasons. Why was it a first or seen as a first?
Well, it was the first show that's ever been dedicated, first show in 22 years that was dedicated to menswear, right? The Aspen Institute's exhibition is always oriented around women's wear, usually retrospectives of major designers, often always white designers. So this was a focus on menswear, but also a focus on Black menswear, the first time ever that it sort of decided to do a show around Black style. So Monica Miller, who's a brilliant curator, writer, scholar, wrote this brilliant book, Slaves to Fashion, that was the basis or underwriting of this exhibition, what became this exhibition. And it was all about the emergence of the Black dandy from basically Victorian England to today. How the Black dandy is this sort of symbol of essentially witty reappropriation of European and American fashion. And also, of course, power and agency, and it intersected so perfectly with my own work. So the Met reached out to me to create these images, which are within the catalog that accompanies the show, and within them I got to really well, I pitched the Met. This was the first time that they had ever really engaged a photographer to make images beyond object documentation on mannequins. But I said to them, this is urgent because this is an embodied conversation. This is a conversation about history. Photography's been at the center of how we understand the Black dandy throughout time. So beyond photographing the garments that were in the show on mannequins, I wanted to make a photographic essay that really looked at ideas of dandyism tailoring throughout time.
One of the aspects of it being a first, I think, is well, there are really two that make it so important. Is one, as you say, it's based upon Monica Miller's work and that of Zora Neale Hurston, too. But for those who don't know Monica's work, she's an extraordinary scholar. This book, Slaves to Fashion, that she wrote was published on an academic press in 2009. This is not a book that became a bestseller and then was part of the public imagination. This was the work of real intention on the part of the institution to spotlight what we need to understand about how we've stitched together society. And I mean that literally. This is a moment when we come to understand the power of fashion and its real stakes. When you think back to the early 19th century, before the 14th Amendment, which has been receiving so much treatment because it's really the second founding of the United States, before we have an amendment that allows for Black Americans to be seen as citizens, right? How do you assert your humanity? What are the devices that you have at your disposal? Fashion becomes a primary vehicle for this, and it's the early stages of the politics of respectability movement, but the Black dandy way of being allowed for that in the early 19th century. So here we have a gala, in effect, that we might see as separate from means of political contestation, showing its roots with it there. And in the next image, you're showing, I saw this image earlier this morning and said, oh, wait, what year is that? Not thinking it was Tyler's. You've saluted the makers, the photographers who give us the index and the archive to understand this practice and this way of being. So as you were putting the exhibition catalog photographs together, can you talk to us about those antecedents, those early photographers who were able to spotlight this practice?
Yeah, well, the biggest one being, of course, James Van Der Zee, sort of the blueprint of documenting Black presence, the Harlem Renaissance, of course, ideas of dress, respectability, the emergence of all these ideas in the 30s, 20s, and 30s. It goes further back, even to the 1800s and 1700s, but I was very aware of this photo history when making this work and felt called really to call it forward in this particular project. Without doing that, it wouldn't feel right to me in a certain way, and I already felt I was doing that in elements of my work. So here I wanted to take a moment today to look at some of the other sort of documents of this sort of style of the emergence of the Black dandy, how central Black folks understood deploying wit and irony in a way to sort of subvert regimes, codes of dress, politics of how to show up in public space. So these are things that people have understood for centuries, and it's amazing to have gotten to contribute to that canon.
I'm also thinking of the work you're showing here, James Van Der Zee's expansive practice, thousands of photographs that are now archived primarily at the Metropolitan Museum. But that institution is the reason, in part, that we know of the work, right? Through the Harlem on My Mind exhibition. So there are ways in which we have to think about the power of archive institutions and history together anew. In one of your exhibitions, you've had many at the High Museum, where you're in conversation with Imani Perry, who's another just extraordinary light in both of our lives. My dear colleague at Harvard and extraordinary writer. We will be together in conversation tomorrow. You did something I found to be such a powerful model for all of us, which is you made clear transparently your influences. You listed the books that have influenced you, and among them was Reflections in Black. Deborah Willis, one of Deborah Willis's, I think, 27 books she's written, so many, and it's created the field effectively and transformed the field of the history of photography. Can you speak to us about your influences here?
Yeah, it made it possible for me to be here. I mean, so of course I thought it was only appropriate that in my exhibition practice I'm sort of calling forth those works, those books that shaped me. I think it was a way to also illuminate the things that underscore what's going on in my photographs meaningfully. And here you see a vitrine in a museum show I did in Amsterdam that really takes all those antecedents with me into my first museum show almost 7 years ago. Vision and Justice being right there in that vitrine. But also portraits by underknown photographers. The Dallas, Texas photographer Early Hudnall Jr., the Deborah Willis's book Pursuit of Beauty, where she's photographing closets in Newark, New Jersey. So the idea of understanding the power of clothes within portraiture and photography has been there for me. The DNA of that has been laid out for me to then take it one step further in my practice. And then in these slides, I'm looking at, this is an exhibition I mounted in Berlin, where I'm including contemporaries and historical artists who I feel are, again, a part of my cosmos, whether it's Rashid Johnson, thinking of material ways to evoke the Black experience beyond strictly photographic representation, Hugh Hayden with his ebony Lincoln Log sculpture of the home. So think of many ways and approaches and tactics to evoke elements of Black presence in art. Is very vital to me, very fundamental to me.
And there are many makers, photographers who've influenced you, but we thought we would spotlight two here. Can you speak to two who've influenced your work?
Yeah, well, we can speak to particularly Carrie Mae Weems with her work Mayflower, amazing work, which was just included there at the small circular framed work in my exhibition. And Carrie's one of those, again, figures for me who Sarah's very close to and who I sort of see as a larger-than-life mentor type of figure who willingly sent me this work to include in my show, but also this work for me evokes the pastoral in a very powerful way. She's clearly aware of the history of 19th century French painting. She's thinking through the idea that leisure was a concept that had to be invented mostly through art, right? The idea that it was a modern idea to say that to have the time in your day to walk through the park, to enjoy small moments of pleasure, makes you a modern citizen, makes you, the people who can enjoy these moments are the real sort of modern citizens of today, who have the luxury and the pleasure to enjoy time in nature. That was an idea that artists sort of pushed forward in their painting. She understands this in her photography, so that's inspiring to me.
You know, you're making me think, too, that the sort of a definition of citizenship is also, in early stages, was who has the right to play.
Right.
You know, who has the right to be free, who has the right to enjoy leisure. And in New York City, which is really a second home for the both of us, if you think of the creation of Central Park, which was framed as a pleasure ground, you have there the razing and the elimination of Seneca Village, you know, the village that's really a model for what free Black society could create and did create. In order to make way for it, that had to go. So these makers, Carrie Mae Weems being one of them, engages with the idea of ground and the tensions there so powerfully. Carrie Mae Weems has also come to class at Harvard, and the line about her has now become the way that I referred to her. One student said, "Sarah, she's the oracle." I said, yeah, she is the oracle. Photographically, so I can see why she would detonate, you know, your practice in this way.
Yeah, and Gordon Parks.
And now Gordon Parks and Tyler Mitchell together could constitute its own panel. We could have a full hour on this, 'cause, you know, we'll speak about some aspects of history that I want to inject here, but Gordon Parks creates the headwaters in the creation of an idiom that can both identify political pitfalls and injustices, but also speak to the imagination and play and possibility. So what aspect of Gordon Parks' work do you want to speak to here?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, he's a figure that's now canonized within photo history, right? And I think much has been made about him as someone who's understood the sort of social documentary aspect of his work, or there's been much said about the social documentary aspect of his work, which is hugely important. But I also see him as an artist who understands form. I mean, when you're looking at these works, I see him as someone who deeply understands the way aesthetics meet the moment.
Right.
And the way that imagination can play a very central role in, as you would say, inciting empathy, especially in Fort Scott, Kansas in 1963. You know, he's let's like thinking about what's going on in the United States, and he's from Fort Scott. In that year, he's utilizing photography to have a very layered conversation about Black identity and presence and personhood.
We went to the archive together recently, the Gordon Parks Archive, Tyler and I, to see that body of work. And Fort Scott, biographically for Gordon Parks, is so foundational. After he's on assignment with Life for a year, he's asked to go back to document really what's come of those who he grew up with. Yeah. And the project is shelved, and he goes back in 1963. Can you speak about the differences? How do you see a shift in his process as it relates to your own in the 63 work there?
This work it was a Life magazine story that went along with literature he wrote called How It Feels to Be Black. So there was clearly this impetus he felt to draw people into the experience of his inner childhood. I think I saw an artist start to reimagine figments of his own childhood through photography. Yeah. I think I was very interested in this psychological space of nature, not just as a random environment that he chose sort of out of a hat, but one that he knew inherently in his own childhood, and one that he knew was a contested space, probably from his own upbringing. So I think about that in my work as well. And
one of children as a vehicle to address injustice is a central theme in Gordon Parks's work that isn't addressed, and I see it as I look at this work, Treading, so powerfully. I see you as a sort of heir apparent in that tradition. Treading, we might mention now, is part of many bodies of your work, but it's now part of your, I would say, definitive book about your work, which is coming out in September, published by Aperture. Tyler, do you have it here?
Oh, yeah.
It's
there.
And you
Sorry,
know,
there's only one copy. It's sitting right here on this table at the moment, so don't mess it up.
I'm honored to be part of it, and it's wonderful. This work, Treading, is a piece that I wrote on for it. What prompted you to create Treading? The photo. Let's go back so that they can see it. There.
Many things. Thinking about landscape as a sort of psychological space, space of memory, space of play, of course, but wanting to work in a more symbolic way. Obviously, the theatricality of the balloon sort of emerging or submerging into or from the water. I remember having physical, PE class in school in Georgia, and treading being like this exercise that I dreaded, absolutely hated. And swimming being a real source of anxiety, because I felt if I couldn't show up and swim in a certain way, that then I would be sort of categorized, right? Or looked or sort of relegated to not being able to swim, or that if I wasn't able to surmount these inner fears, that I was sort of, that there are lots of tropes, right, around the idea of Black people swimming, staying afloat above water. And so treading was this like exercise that was in school that was all about how long you could tread, how many minutes. I mean, there would be a timer with the teacher, and I just remember it feeling like torture, honestly. But also being this space where I had to show up in a particular way. So all those ideas, those memories, again, similar to how Gordon was probably mining certain memories in Fort Scott, Kansas, came forward in this body of work, thinking about Black relationships to water and landscape as a very freeing, transcendent space, but also one layered with, difficult inner emotions, at least for me personally. So it always starts there.
This image came to mind, I'd seen it, came to mind about a year ago when I was standing in Mississippi at Grable Landing. And I was there to write about what is, I think, the first multi-site monument that is now dedicated to the legacy of Emmett Till and Mamie Till. And I was standing with the head of the Interpretive Center, Emmett Till Interpretive Center, and was standing at the site where it's claimed that his body was brought out of the river. And it occurred to me that one of the ways that we maintain this, that there's a haunting in the arts regarding the constancy of racial terror on land that also allows for play and the imagination and the possible. And this work, Treading, even the metaphor of endurance, unattainable endurance, made me think of this work. The trope of play with those balloons is so stunning, but it's equally gripping to me that there's a chilling quality to his face that seems placid. The vibrancy is there because of his youth, but not because of his expression. So you wonder, or at least I did when I looked at it, what has happened here? Will he be all right? The doubling with the mirrored reflection suggests that there's no bodily presence necessarily there. It's a chilling image, and it's one that I know will last beyond our time here together on this earth as a testament to what's been required to endure the theft and the loss of childhood, right, that it's amounted to, and the maintenance of hope and possibility represented by those balloons. And I just want to salute you for the emotional power and sacrifice that creating a work like this requires, because there are many others that perform a similar kind of political labor in the public arena. So this is one of the many ways in which you're connected to Gordon Parks, who did much the same, for us, and you're taking it forward. So thank you. It's hard for me to look at that image. So, but I want to seed for you in the audience, because we're going to turn to you in a few minutes, to think about when an image, a photograph, transformed your sense of the possible and the social landscape. So we're going to continue, but you start thinking about this, and we're going to come to you in a minute. There are other works that show this relationship with Gordon Parks, but they're all engaging with this question of ground and land. The final ones here made me think of something I've wondered about for about 10 years. Why are there so few Black landscape photographers? Where's our Black Ansel Adams, for example? And looking here, I think I have the answer. I'm talking with one of the preeminent Black landscape photographers who doesn't call himself that, but soon will be. But you, in the next photograph, give us a sense of this world of wonder and possibility within. But you also have references that some might not imagine are coming into the work, surrealist references. Can you speak to a few of those?
Yeah, I sort of, these particular images also made in the South, in Atlanta, Georgia. There was an impetus to expand the imaginary of the Southern landscape.
Yeah.
The idea that people think of it as one thing, as sort of thorned, overgrown, potentially, one particular image we might have of a Southern landscape.
Yeah.
So I liked the idea of finding sand dunes, open sky, which also call reference to a Japanese surreal photographer, Shoji Ueda, who would stage his own family within sort of expanses of sand dunes in Japan. The idea that, a certain landscape can almost be placeless, that Black people could also exist within, was very exciting to me. So this was found in Albany, Georgia, and I really wanted to situate a certain sort of anachronistic vision of Black life and play within that sort of overall landscape. And you're right, your thought and your sort of point about landscape photography is really beautiful, because I really very much am more relating to this mode of working more and more now.
Stunning. Well,
We can sort of blast through the...
Yeah,
we have 20 more slides.
We have so many, and there's always just a richness of being in Aspen, just the power of this place. So we wanted to have more in case other things came up. But I think we might want to land on an image that, wow. Where would you like to land?
Do we want to go here?
We can,
So that we sort of move in?
Yeah. I wanted to land there, but I didn't want everything is so juicy to unpack. This photograph, Ancestors, calls to mind the power of lineage, to me, that the photograph creates. I think when we're photographed, we are immediately within lineage. We think the value of a photograph might be what it does to us today, but often it's found later on by the descendants, by those who happen upon a photograph. And I know those who are photographed here are also friends of yours, is that right?
Yeah, this is a young photographer, the younger lady, like adjusting her hair, sort of going through her hair with her hands, is a young photographer, talented photographer, Denise Hewitt, who was more of a mentee. I met through like a mentorship program. So there's, again, layers of community that return back in the work. But this particular image and the resulting project was made also in relationship to Gordon Parks and his Harlem Family series, because I was named a Gordon Parks Foundation Fellow in 2021 and was basically given a grant to make a body of work. And I wanted to consider the way in which he also understood the centrality of visualizing the family, the interior, and how photography is at the center of that. So for me, and also I have to shout out Aspen again, because actually I was doing and making a lot of this work while I was in residence at the Anderson Ranch Center in 2021. So anyway, many layers to this particular photograph and the wider body of work, but we wanted to bring everyone here, right, to think about. Well, I'll let you prompt.
Well, so what I'd love to do now is to think about how images have transformed all of us. So I'm looking at the group here. What we're going to do, if you're all game, is we're going to pair yourselves with your neighbor. And if you wouldn't mind just sharing a time when a photograph transformed your sense of the possible, what was possible in your life. And we've shared already with you how photographs have transformed our lives, and I'll share one of my anecdotes afterwards. But we're going to offer a few minutes for this kind of exchange, and then for the brave souls who want to share with us a meaningful part of the conversation, we'd love to hear. So we're going to spend a few minutes doing that, and we can talk together. And I'm going to rove around and kind of eavesdrop on what you're talking about.
Pair off.
All right. So let's see. Pair.